Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is about Michael Collins because it is the anniversary of his death, being the 22nd of August. So, who was Michael Collins? Well, he's best known as being the first leader of independent Ireland. So he was chairman of the Executive Council of the Provisional Government. So that's equivalent to Prime Minister or Taoiseach. Michael Collins was fortunate enough to be born in the United Kingdom in 1890, in County Cork, UK to be precise. So you may consider that a little provocative. He was born in Ireland, of course, and the whole of Ireland was part of the United Kingdom at the time. So his father was well into his 60s, his mother was much younger, and Collins was the youngest of several children. His father had been a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, IRB, commonly called the Fenians. It was not a sectarian term of abuse until the late 19th century, although oddly, some people, Collins included, regarded Fenians as being a badge of honour. They were very atavistic, and they looked back to ancient Irish mythology, and really myth-making was all they were about, looking back to these legendary heroes of the ancient past, reading these semi-historical chronicles about Fenians who could memorize several books of poetry, jump over rivers and things like that, and were super fighters. So Collins was very small when his father died. His father supposedly said that Collins would do great work for Ireland, but of course in a Republican context that meant being anti-English and splitting us away from Great Britain. So Collins' father had recalled people dying in the famine in the late 1840s, and he blamed that squarely on the English. Now, obviously there are some English people who are responsible for that, and some Irish people, and just bad luck, bad weather, and potato blight and things like that. Anyway, so Collins, he was reasonably smart, did well at school, was from an English-speaking family, had a smattering of Irish. So he's from Sam's Cross, which is near Clonakilty in West Cork. So it's one of the areas of Ireland that was severely impacted by An Gort Mór, the Great Hunger, which I alluded to earlier. So he left school at 16. He was fortunate to go to school that long. There was compulsory schooling in Ireland, the whole UK at the time. It was free of charge until the age of 12. Beyond that, people had to pay. So most people left school at 12. Some stayed a bit later, to 14, to 16, to 18 if you're very lucky. And an exceptionally small number went on to tertiary education, not Collins amongst them. So he passed the exam to join the post office. He was going places, had a permanent and pensionable job. He later moved to London to pursue his career, was a stockbroker. So he was active in the Gaelic Athletic Association. The GEA was not just about sports, hurling and Gaelic football. It was also a cultural and political organisation. Founded in 1884, the GAA on its own website said in 1887 it was taken over by the Irish Republican Brotherhood, as in there were some IRB members of this. It was a clandestine organisation, the IRB, who were in the GAA and tried to move it in their direction. So the GAA was about promoting Gaelic culture, not really Irish culture, specifically Gaelic culture, looking back to Ireland as it was before the 9th century AD, before the Danes came. Anything that happened between them, any means we'd absorbed were utterly wicked, but particularly anything English or Anglo-Saxon, they prefer to say, was detestable. Collins had to overlook the small fact that he was of Anglo-Norman descent himself, but somehow that didn't count. Incidentally, he was a Catholic, like a high majority of people at West Cork. Sam Maguire, who was from Dunmanway, well, buried in Dunmanway, not far from where Collins was born, he was one of the leading lights of the foundation of the GAA, and significantly was also a senior figure in the IRB. So the IRB wanted to split Ireland away from Great Britain and have a republic, totally separate from our neighbour. So Collins was involved in both the IRB and the GAA, and the GAA said you must play Irish sports and have no garrison sports, which meant rugger, football, cricket, anything of that nature, speaking Irish as much as possible, their parties, Irish dancing, Irish food and drink. Now, promoting Irish culture is of course a completely laudable goal, but one needn't have this cultural apartheid and think we can't possibly share anything with our neighbours, with our kith and kin. We've given them a lot of our culture and we've absorbed some of theirs. One can't draw these very strict boundaries as the IRB would have us do, really being the mirror image of some hibernophobes in Great Britain. Anyhow, so apart from defaming Great Britain, he was living in their country, and which he claimed to detest. He lived in Shepherd's Bush for a while. There's a plaque outside his house. So he's doing well financially. And he was in favour of the GAA rule that said no member of the British Armed Forces or the Royal Irish Constabulary or a pensioner therefrom can be a member of the GAA. So very much against the Crown Forces. If you're an Irishman, indeed of someone of nationalist opinions, there was nothing controversial about joining the RIC. That was the police. Join the British Army, join the Royal Navy. That was Ireland's military. Now, a nationalist, typical nationalist, would be a home ruler rather than a Republican. So republicanism, the idea of total separation and a republic, was very much a minority interest at the time. First World War came. Collins saw this as a chance to attack Great Britain and split us away from our neighbour. And there was conscription in Great Britain. There was some talk of it extending to Ireland. He considered moving to the United States, where he had relatives. In the end, he didn't. So he did return to Ireland in early 1916. He resigned his job and told his employers he's joining an Irish regiment. He probably had a good chortle about that because he heard that Easter Rising was in the offing. He somehow got himself a rifle in London and brought it back. So there he was, as part of the Easter Rising in Dublin in the GPO, which was, of course, an ignominious defeat for the Irish Volunteers, later called the IRA. They always make a song and a dance out of it, but it was a total defeat, as in they took 100% casualties. So they held their positions for a few days, but almost every single last one of them was captured, and a few of them were killed. So if they'd been smarter, they would have got away, someone would have escaped or whatever, hid out in the countryside. So that was that. He was then sent to Frongoch camp in Wales, where they treated extremely well, not forced to work. Hard to think of any other country in the world would have been so compassionate as the United Kingdom, would have been so humane to these people in the midst of a mortal struggle, the First World War. Prisoners of war in other countries were being slowly starved to death, not in the United Kingdom. Showed just how merciful the government was. Anyway, he was released after only 8 months. Again, astonishingly lenient. So we're not remotely oppressed. We were blessed to be united with Great Britain. What would have happened if you'd launched a rebellion in Germany or Russia or France or just about any other country you name, of something like 1,000 people who took part, only 16 executed? That was exceptionally merciful. So, but Collins was not going to be clement. He was not going to repay this mercy with compassion of himself or saying, they gave me my life once, so I'm grateful for that and it won't cause more trouble. He was briefly the chairman of the Supreme Council of Fenians, as head of the IRB, and in their theory, therefore president of the Irish Republic, which they claim already existed. They proclaimed it on St. Patrick's Day, 1848, a fact which seems to be lost on Republicans who are looking at Easter 1916 and Pierce's proclamation of the Republic and Pierce making himself president. When Pierce obviously effectively ruled about 1 square mile for 6 days. So Collins was keen to start the conflict anew, claiming he was on the German side, and then the Germans were losing and the United States was against the Germans, so Ireland wasn't on their side. According to Collins, all of a sudden, the Republican movement wanted us to be represented, Ireland as a separate country, not part of the UK, at the Paris peace talks. But how can we be part of it if we weren't belligerent? So Republicans couldn't get their story straight. And if we were belligerents, we were on the losing side, according to Republicans, because we're on the German side. Says so in the Easter Proclamation, although it doesn't actually name Germany. So we were given short shrift, Republican movement was given short shrift in their attempt to have separate Irish representation at the Treaty of Versailles. So he was elected to the British Parliament in December 1918 for South Armagh. He never took a seat because he would not take an oath of allegiance to King George V. That was that, and he was high up in the IRA, Director of Intelligence from 1919 to 21. And amongst the Republicans, he was distinguished for being completely merciless, being willing to kill unarmed people on a large scale. Those he accused of being spies, or Alan Bell, a civil servant, who saw how Collins was funding the IRA. He was a very clever person, could remember lots of statistics about where he'd hidden money, took part in a propaganda video posing over the execution block of Robert Emmet. You can see that in Kilmainham Jail Museum in Dublin. And that was that. And he was fearless, cycling around Dublin, being stopped by the RIC, not showing any nerves, which is why they let him through. That was that. He said, only if you appear to be hiding do they look for you. So just be nonchalant, and he got away with it. So the press was all full of him, claiming he'd led attacks all around the country, which was largely nonsense, which led to his overblown reputation, but he nevertheless had some hairbreadth escapes from the Crown forces. Then, July 1921, he was in favour of the truce. He was seen as obdurate, but no, he agreed to that. De Valera had him go to London. He negotiated in Downing Street. He formed a bond with Winston Churchill, colonial secretary, if I've got that right. Lloyd George put his arm around Collins, said, look at this map of the British Empire, come in with us, help us run this. And apparently that had an effect of him, according to Sean McBride. Sean McBride was only about 18 then, was going back and forth between London and Dublin on weekends carrying mails. Sean McBride, later Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ireland, son of John McBride, who was executed for his role in the Easter Rising. So anyway, Collins signed the treaty, as he said, signed his own death warrant, because some hardline Republicans regard this as treasonous. So then there were the Dáil debates in December 1921. People said if the vote had been held immediately, the Dáil would have voted it down. But the Teachta Dáilí, the deputies, went back to their constituencies and consulted with people over Yuletide. And apparently many people said, no, we're very satisfied with this. We're not headbangers, we're reasonable people, and we want peace. This sounds like a good deal. So the vote was held in January 1922, and it passed by 7 votes in Dáil Éireann. Bear in mind, every single person in Dáil Éireann was a Sinn Féiner. Something Sinn Féiners overlook. Sinn Féin signed the treaty about partition. Sinn Féin voted for the partition treaty. So Michael Collins was a member of Sinn Féin at the time. Then the party split, pro-treaty, anti-treaty, and there were these acrimonious treaty debates. And as Cathal Brugh correctly pointed out, if we sign this, we will be voluntarily agreeing that Ireland is part of the British Empire, which to be a dominion on the same status as Canada. It explicitly said that in the treaty. It was agreed to. King George V would enjoy the title King of Ireland, as well as King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So that was that. Michael Collins himself, he agreed to these terms, Parliament of Southern Ireland. He swore an oath of allegiance to King George V, our sovereign lord. So that was that. And then the Civil War kicked off in 1922, on the 22nd of June to be precise. Now, then there was Sir Henry Wilson, who was bumped off. I've mentioned him in another video, so I shan't go too much into that. Did Collins order that or not? He'd also cemented sectarian murder in the north. It's true that loyalist terrorists had been carried out beastly attacks on the civil Catholic population, and Collins sent up guns for the IRA to hit back. And they did kill some loyalist terrorists, but they also killed lots of Protestant civilians. So Collins was guilty of that, something we choose to overlook. Collins is a man I don't have much time for. He broke almost every agreement he ever made. He was a traitor wherever you stand, to republicanism, to the Crown, to moderate nationalism, to the idea of a non-sectarian Ireland. And then the Civil War began, and he was killed at the age of 32, which is infantile in terms of a leader's age. And when someone dies very young as a leader, their reputation shoots up, and there are also conspiracy theories about how he died. So he's in West Cork directing operations. There he was, drinking on duty, a general drinking on duty in a pub, and then drove back to Cork, but was ambushed at Bell-na-Blá, the mouth of the flowers. Was there some sort of conspiracy? De Valera was supposedly hiding around there. I'm much more for a cock-up than a conspiracy. The IRA, they ambushed Free Staters. Free Staters attacked the IRA. All's fair in love and war. So Collins died the death that he devised for so many others. May well have been Sonny O'Neill who shot him dead. There's a lot of speculation. So I don't think there was some big plan to lure him down to kill him there. He could have been shot dead in Dublin. TDs have been shot dead in Dublin. Free State soldiers were shot dead all over the shop. So I don't think it was particularly planned. And he was brought back to Shannakill Hospital. There's a famous photo of his corpse there, bandaged head. Not that it did him any good. His hands holding a crucifix. And he is interred in Glasnevin Cemetery. He had a big public funeral. Arthur Griffith had died only 10 days earlier, who was the founder of Sinn Féin and a crucial figure at the time, an ally of Collins. And what else about Collins? So yeah, he never married and engaged to Kitty Kiernan. You ought to see the biopic of him. Michael Collins came out in 1996, starring Liam Neeson. So Collins, he's only adulated in his hometown. You can see a statue of him there. So a highly controversial figure. His reputation didn't suffer from the Civil War getting really savage and the Free State killing large numbers of IRA prisoners, at least 77. The true figure thought to be several times higher. 77 in authorised slayings, but many more killed in revenge killings. So the Irish Free State Army behaved far worse than the Crown forces, but was almost never talked about. It's part of the Anglophobia which imbues nationalist discourse to constantly be execrating Great Britain, particularly England, and constantly overlooking or excusing what were undoubtedly crimes committed by the Irish government. So that's that. Michael Collins, people said, oh, he would have been a fabulous leader if he stayed. Some people said he would have been a fascist dictator, something like that. And the blue shirt fascist movement later lionized him. I don't think they can really claim him. We just don't know. He thought that we'd become a prosperous agricultural country like Denmark or something like that. So that was Michael Collins. I don't think we need to thank him for anything. We would have been better off staying within the United Kingdom. So today is the day he died, and I went to that commemoration in 1997. You can see me at the very front row wearing an olive green t-shirt on the 75th anniversary of his death. There's a book published about him in '98 where I could make myself out in the photo.